a productive meeting and engaging discussion. At this time, I don't have a lengthy welcome because we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jennifer from JMT to launch the meeting.
Great. Thank you so much for that, and welcome everyone. As I am using a different laptop, bear with me for one moment as I switch some screens around here and am able to share. So hopefully everybody is able to see the screen.
Yes.
All right. It looks like perfect. Thank you. All right. So again, just echoing, thank you again, everybody, for your time and your participation today. Definitely looking forward to continuing the conversations on this very important effort and looking forward to your continued input. We have quite the robust agenda this evening, as we always will, and definitely want to get to some of those great conversations and discussions and be able to talk back and forth and start really diving in, as we've talked about previously, into just the elements of the zoning code. So we'll begin with looking over our meeting number 2 recap. Getting through our prior meeting minute approval. So those meeting minutes were provided to everyone so that we can go ahead and approve them, as well as our the information request from the last meeting. The overall schedule and expectations for tonight's meeting. So we will not be going through, as we have in the last 2 meetings, of everyone's expectations of this evening. We've gotten a really good feel for that over those first 2 meetings, and we're going to just talk right about the expectations for this evening's meeting and really get into what this next group of meetings is about, with what we previously called the SWOT analysis. And we really are reframing that, rather than being strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but reframing that into the PSET, the preserve, the strengthen, enhance, and transform, which is much more relevant for this particular activity. From there, we're going to review the homework that was submitted and how that's really helping to feed into this PSET work that we are doing. We'll continue with those case studies. We introduced them very briefly during our last meeting. Want to touch on them a little bit more, and really in particular to some of the elements and what those case studies have done and what these elements are that we want to talk about. So how those relate directly back and forth. And then really getting into that PSET discussion, talking about our homework for next meeting, our wrap up, open comments, and of course, everyone's favorite part of every meeting, the adjournment. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. We've already given the welcome, so we want to just touch on briefly. We'll always show this slide. It is the same slide you've seen before, but it's always really important for us to come back and recognize why we are here in the first place. So we're here to evaluate and make recommendations on how to carry forward Newtown's planned community framework, including but not limited to modifications to zoning regulations and development processes. One of the things to really note, again, as we've always talked about, is that our job is to evaluate everything and then make recommendations. It is not actually making the zoning changes, but those recommendations. From our last meeting, which was really 2 months ago now, so in July, it's been a little bit. Now we are going month to month, every month through until April, but our last meeting is when we concluded the visioning portion of this. And that was really setting forward the parameters that we will be looking at everything as really our litmus test to move forward. So when we look at this combined output of people and community, diversity and inclusivity, open space and green space, aid in maintaining the spirit of Columbia, Embrace the future while honoring the values that Columbia was based upon. And Columbia is a place that needs to value its uniqueness based on its history. And that was that combined group output. And those are the items that we will be taking all of our recommendations and our thought processes and comparing them back to that. So from our prior two meetings, we do want to move into the meeting minutes and our approval and discussion of the meeting minutes. And as you can see on the screen, we have just what the voting process is. So just as a reminder for those who might not have participated in a voting process before, or even a refresher as you have, I'll ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes as distributed. So those did come to everybody in an email from Jeff about a week ago. And then I'll ask for a second to the motion. Once there's a motion made and a second on the motion, if there are any corrections or amendments, we'll have that during discussion, and we will either vote to approve the meeting minutes as received or approve them with any changes or revisions as we've discussed. So there's two different ways to vote. Really, if you are comfortable with the WebEx arena and doing the raise hand, which is a little symbol that you can raise your hand, or if you turn your video on and truly just raise your hand, that might be a little easier and faster as well, and always good to have the facial interaction with everybody. So with that, I will ask, is there a motion to approve task force number 1 meeting minutes? So these are the meeting minutes from the June meeting.
So moved.
And that was so quickly, was that Michael?
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. So Michael has made the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Fran has made the second. Is there any discussion regarding the meeting minutes? And Nina, I see your hand raised. Did you have a discussion item? And then your hand was very quickly lowered.
No, I was
Any-
just trying to vote. I was
Oh,
2 seconds ahead.
got
Sorry.
ahead of us. Thank you, Nina. Any discussion regarding the June meeting minutes? All right, seeing none, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes as were distributed, please raise your hand. Fantastic. Thank you. The meeting minutes have been approved. And I see the hands still going up and down. Great. So is there a motion to approve the task force number 2 meeting minutes? These are the July meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Sharon, for making the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ashley, for seconding the motion. Is there any discussion regarding the meeting minutes that were distributed for meeting number 2?
So let me ask a question. Are those minutes written and then, the audio and then the written portion for the breakout sessions?
Correct. So it is, the meeting minutes include a combination of the audio as well as the full document, which takes a lot of what the audio was, spells it out as well, because people are both audio and visual receivers of information. So it's a combination of both. Yes.
Okay, so when I went to the training session that the staff so graciously put on, they said there could only be one form of minutes, either had to be all audio or all text.
Yes, that's a good clarifying point. I think the video in this case, because it was not live, is supplementary. So the adopted meeting minutes would be the written meeting minutes that we'd be voting on today that were sent around by Jeff. And those do include notes from the breakout sessions as well.
Okay, great. I just want to know what I'm voting on. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. And thank you for asking, and Sarah, for the clarification. And I suppose as you state that, yes, in the written document, there is very much like an attachment. There's a link for the audio, just as there's an attachment for the meeting attendance. But the meeting minutes we were voting on is that written piece.
Okay, but it doesn't include the link. Right, so
That's right.
link,
It's just the written minutes.
Sorry,
Right.
yes.
okay.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes as distributed, please raise your hand. Great, hands have been raised. The majority has raised their hand, so meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. And what we just did there, we will do each meeting now with the meeting minutes from the prior meeting. So we will go through this exercise at the beginning of each of our meetings. So now very briefly, our overall schedule and expectations for meeting number 3. We've already shown this schedule several times and it is included in the meeting materials from prior meetings. Just a reminder, we are here. We are officially into the PSET analysis, which was formally recognized as the SWOT analysis. So we will be getting into those elements. You will see on the slide something coming up in October, which we will talk about further later on in this meeting, is the public meeting and the public survey. So we will discuss on that as well, what that includes, as well as the next several meetings. As we've mentioned before as well, but just as a great reminder, look for the meeting minutes from this meeting within a few days after. And you can see on here, the agenda was sent to you for this meeting no later than 3 business days before the meeting. We are here on the 4th Tuesday, and then no later than 2 business days after the meeting, the presentation will be posted and the meeting minutes will be distributed within a week. And likewise, homework assignments. I know everybody's favorite part of this task force is, of course, due within 2 to 3 weeks after each meeting. So really want to talk about the expectations, not only for tonight's meeting, but our next several. So we are now, as I mentioned before, their first 2 meetings really were to set that visioning, give some background information and level set everybody to come at these discussion points really from that same foundational knowledge, with everybody bringing different perspectives and different additional knowledge from there. Now we're entering these, what we're calling the PSET meetings: preserve, strengthen, enhance, and transform. And this will be tonight, October, and November, and then potentially as we're looking at December, as we look towards making recommendations, we'll have a little bit of an iterative process of still looking at potential additional elements as well as the overall recommendations. So what we're really looking at now is diving in. I know there were several comments of, let's roll up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, let's really dive in and evaluate everything. So even if the thought process is, I think everything is perfect as it is, it's like any good contract. After so much time, you should always put out a new look at who else is out there, make sure we're reviewing everything. Does it stay? Does it need to change? Can we strengthen some language? Anything of that nature. And so that's really what we're doing now, is we're reviewing all of the major elements of the zoning code, that section 125 that is in everyone's virtual binder. So we'll go over tonight those major discussion elements that we are going to talk over tonight and our next several meetings. That's a combination of what we've heard from stakeholders, what we've garnered from your homework assignments, and what we've just been collecting and Department of Planning and Zoning has been collecting over time regarding the zoning code. Those major elements will be reviewed individually. We'll look at it with that case study information so that we can identify them one at a time and not try to tackle everything in section 125 all at once. So we'll have major topic items, the major element items. We'll focus on those at different meetings, and we'll save the discussion on some of those other elements until we get to those meetings where we're talking about them. And then, of course, with each of them, we'll identify, do we need to preserve it as it is? Do we need to strengthen the language? I know there were concerns, different homework assignments identified, well, maybe there's a loophole or there's ways people are getting around it, around certain elements of the code. Do we need to strengthen that? Do we need to enhance what's in there, or do we need to transform it? And then those elements will be refined during the recommendations meeting. So our next few meetings are really going to focus on how is this element of the code? What do we need to do with it? And then we'll set that aside. When we get into the recommendations, we'll come back and say, okay, we said we need to do something to strengthen it. So now let's talk. What does that look like? So I'll pause for a moment there. That was all of our really background information, the schedule, and the expectations of the next few meetings. Is everyone ready to just dive into the actual PSET principles?
Okay.
All right, sounds good. So as we talk about the PSET principles, this line that you're seeing on the screen in front of you is what you've probably seen it before as you've looked over other Howard County documents. It really looks at it of taking less change and lower intensity to more change and greater intensity. So we first talk about areas to preserve. And what this is we're talking about areas to preserve, it's protect and maintain. And the concept, and this concept is here in the italics, preserving what matters most. So moving across that line, we then look at areas to strengthen. So strengthening is what is the existing communities and infrastructure? How can we strengthen that? Strengthen what already works, not necessarily keep it exactly as it is or transform it completely, but let's just make it stronger as it is. Continuing to move towards that more change in that greater intensity, we look at areas to enhance, and this is for residential and non-residential. So adding into what is already working, but wanting it to be more robust than what it is today. And so as there were many comments about mixed use development, mixed housing, that's some of the things to kind of think about as we're talking about enhancing. So we're enhancing what already exists. And finally, the more change and the greater intensity is transform. So transforming areas that are underutilized or poised for change. And this really starts thinking about what can we do perhaps in redevelopment areas. So transforming what needs to evolve. So through this process, we will look at the different elements, and these are the principles that we're going to be talking to on each one. As I mentioned before, coming from just a lot of history that Department of Planning and Zoning has in working with the Section 125, the Newtown zoning district, as well as the many, it was a total of now 25 stakeholder meetings, and the homework received from this task force. This list was created, excuse me, and you'll see this again at the end. These are the major elements that everything really fed into, and those homework assignments really there are many things that were very similar that everybody here who submitted homework really honed in on as different items. You'll notice that they're in different colors, and I'll come back to this slide again later, but those colors also help identify what we'll be discussing at each meeting. So for tonight, we'll get into the creating another Newtown district, as well as defining credited open space, because we're doing a lot of this. What are the principles? What are the case studies? So we're going to tackle those two topics tonight, and then you'll see the other topics that are listed here. In addition, if there are topics that come up as we're going through, we will add those. This is not a one and done list. We will certainly add those or identify where they may fall within this list of the major topics already. And that's why we talk about it's the next 3 to 4 meetings, definitely 3 meetings of talking over the PSET elements. And then that 4th meeting as we're getting into and moving towards recommendations, we'll be aware that there might be other things that come up. So let's go through the homework review. Just as a reminder, the original assignment was asking think of a time when you made a change to your property or know of a case that made a change. Really, the homework that came back was, what changes are you aware of? What are some of the case studies you know? What are the development studies that you know? And how did you work through that zoning process? So the top 3 things that went well, the top 3 things that were challenging, and considering really recommendations that should be put forward that would be beneficial of working within the zoning code. excuse me, homework is a very important part of all of this. So we did receive 9 homework assignments. We'd love to have more to really work through at our next meeting as well. And just recognizing, and you'll see even as we go through here, this task force and these assignments really are feeding into the outcome of what the task force will be producing at the end. So our conclusions from the homework cases. Talking first of all the things that went well. So what went well in using Newtown zoning code? And this really gets into that preserve and or strengthen areas. So community buy-in, really looking at, and this goes through that whole public process of there are ample opportunities for people to hear about it, share information, have that opportunity to buy into what's going on, which really relates back with public engagement and the helpful staff support. So through this process, that the staff is a part of everything, and through that public engagement process, there is this buy-in. Also in this, they're very similar. Developers have the opportunity to receive design input from the community, and that's going back to the number of touch points. That there is a clear sequential process that the public can follow. And so it is something of, it was noted that there are a number of different documents online that illustrate that process. The design advisory panel feedback on village center design. So again, these number of touch points of having some feedback into all of this. And then the efforts to align with the county's general plan. Additional conclusions of what went well using the Newtown zoning code is that able to tailor zoning regulations to align with general plan goals and policies. So again, going back to that overarching general plan that this Newtown district and the zoning here works to align. Ability to align with plans without rewriting the zoning constantly through this process, that it's a plan-led criteria-based control at the FDP level. So those are the different items of what went well, and these are the direct results of coming out of the homework assignments. If you're not seeing your exact verbiage, it's because we took all of the homework assignments and they were very robust write-ups. So really appreciate the thought and effort that went into them. And we really combined if we had similarities in them. So then key challenges. Of course, this is typically the easier one to find, right? It's always easy to find what doesn't work, more so than what always does. So the FDPs, that they are available online, but they're really hard to find and difficult to read. And you'll see a little bit of that even in our presentation as we've pulled some information from some of those online plans and to show them. That some of the language is vague or discretionary, which also, as I mentioned with the key challenges, this becomes the enhance and or transform areas. The regulations, guidelines, the rules, they're not user-friendly, so they might be available online, might be easy to find, but not user-friendly. It's a fragmented and lengthy review process, that there are too many public meetings throughout the process. We heard a lot on the positive side of what went well is there's a lot of touch points, but the negative side is maybe there's too many touch points. Inconsistent enforcement of Newtown zoning. The original petitioner position no longer seems valid in the process. The accessibility of land use and density tracking and how that works within the zoning code, and that there are no pattern books for developers. Additional key challenges. There are no universal design guidelines to ensure inclusive design for all. So that gets back into an overarching design, pattern books, universal design guides, what the codes are, everything comes back together in these. No clear path for accessory dwelling units, ADUs in the Newtown zoning, and that's something that has been coming up through state legislation as well, and in many other counties throughout the state of Maryland. the rigidity of the FDP regulations for land use and building materials. So again, as we look at everything, keeping in mind that this was developed many years ago, technology has changed, materials have changed. So thinking about that of, it's not always that it doesn't work, but even, and I always like to talk about a deck in something like this. So when you think about a deck, years and years ago, it was, you had a wood deck. Today, maybe you have a composite material deck, or you have some other type of deck material that just simply didn't exist. So when it talks about the rigidity of the FDP regulations of building materials, so those are some of the things to think about as we continue to move forward. Of course, the aging framework to meet the current trends and technologies, so touched on that a little bit as well with that deck idea. And that's generally an easy one to think about. So then overall from the homework assignments, and I see some folks writing things down. Of course, this presentation will be available within this week as well. So you'll have all of this and we'll continue to go back to it also. But there were a lot of really good recommendations, and these recommendations very much fed into the questions and the elements that we'll be discussing. So really reviewing the entire process. What is the process with the PDP, the CSP, the FDP? What's the relevancy? What are the roles that each needs to continue to play? Clarify the use criteria. So this, when we speak to this one, that really gets back into some of the vague language that came up as a comment from more than one homework assignment. Streamline the process. So these really go hand in hand as well. So how can it become more user-friendly? What does that development review look like? What does that public engagement? So when you think about the challenges, one of those challenges being there's too much public engagement because there's something in every step of the process. Make the digital FDP library more accessible. And that can certainly be in multiple ways of accessibility as we think about accessibility. One, just simply anybody and any individual being able to find it, but also thinking about accessibility standards and guidelines as well. Improving the flexibility and adaptability of zoning regulations, what can happen, what needs to happen, what doesn't happen, and better enforce the existing process. Remove the original petitioner position. And then continuing on, allowing mixed use and innovative development patterns. Permit residential use in village centers. So that's something is certainly as we talk about density as well. Adding explicit language permitting ADUs, the accessory dwelling units in the new town zoning, and encouraging age-friendly and affordable housing types. Incorporate incentive zoning for desirable features. So there are, for those familiar, there is incentive and disincentive that can be done with zoning as well. Modernize FDP design guidance. And that was it. So it's quite a bit. I did go through them just one at a time with the animation, because if I were to put that full list up at one time, it's easy to get lost through that. But there's a lot of great information that came out of these homework assignments, and really appreciate the amount of thought and effort that went into them. There were a lot of similarities, even as the cases that were looked at and the individual perspectives were very different. There still were quite a few similarities in all of the homework assignments. And so that's really comes back to this list that I showed earlier, where today we will be talking about very specifically the creating another new town district element that already exists within the new town zoning code, as well as defining credited open space. And what does that look like? And what should we do with that? Does it need to stay as it is? Does it need to transform? And we'll go through all of that. Our next meeting, we will get into reviewing the original petitioner role, talking about incorporating moderate income housing unit regulations and managing density caps. So those will be the topics for the next meeting. I know as we speak to open space today and defining that, it might be desirable to want to jump to, especially the density caps, but we'll table those thoughts as they might come up and we'll bring them back at that next meeting. And then our meeting after that, we'll be looking at the new town district structure, redefining apartment land use, the expansion of uses and materials, design guidance, and finally, the simplification of regulations and processes. And as I mentioned before, there may be additional elements, major elements that come up. We will add that to the list. This is not a one and done list, but this gives us a nice framework to be able to tackle what many have said feels like a very large task, and it is. There are 10 of these meetings, but able to tackle it in a very responsive manner and a great framework that can open us up for some great discussions. So I'm going to pause there. Any thoughts or any questions before we move into case studies? Yes, Judelle.
Hi, I was just curious to know from the feedback about public meetings. I wanted to better understand the perception that there were too many public meetings. I'm not sure who to ask or where to bring that up, but it is something I'd like to understand better. Thank you.
Okay, great. And that will come back really as we talk through. Let me go back one, the regulations and the processes. And we can speak to that as part of that effort as well. And right now, from reading through the homework assignments, because at each step of the way, there is some type of a engagement factor. And that's where the comment came up through the homework. So sometimes we think about public meetings as a very large, broad topic or a specific type, but it could be anything that is open to the public, but that will come back under the processes as well. I saw Greg's hand and then Brian's hand, and then we'll move to the next topic after.
Yes, my question relates to your conclusions coming out of the homework assignment. How or where will I be able to go to review the submissions and assignments to satisfy myself as to the conclusions that you've drawn?
These were coming out specifically as for many individuals, it was their bullet point conclusions that were coming out and that we were moving forward into this. We can talk as a team, our team with the county of how we release those homework assignments to identify how they might go out there. And we'll get back to you on that, Greg. Thank you.
I'm going to be a
Brian.
disbeliever until I see the actual submissions and against the conclusions that you've drawn and presented to us here tonight. But thank you. I'll wait. I'll be glad to and look forward to hearing back.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And Brian. You are on mute, Brian, as you're speaking.
Yes, you mentioned design guidelines. There are design guidelines in each of the industrial parts and various other aspects of Columbia. And those design guidelines at some point could be modified, but it's not that they don't exist. They're very clear cut. And obviously design guidelines for a residential area is completely different to an industrial park or some other place. The other thing is, FDPs can be changed. I mean, so if you wanted to change a district, you can change the you could petition to change the FDP to match the new design guidelines. What's the other thing I got? Oh yeah, the one thing that seems to be missed here is oversight, consistency in applying new town zoning. That's one of the things that's happened where you have not got consistent oversight from all the different entities, whether it's Howard Hughes or whether it's the design advisory panel, the village boards, or it could be the DPZ. There's not consistent oversight.
And that, yes, and that was one of the ones that were noted of the, in the challenges, and that will also come up through, a lot of this will be with that simplification of regulations and processes, but also evaluating, and the one above it, of expansion of uses and materials and design guidance in new town zoning. So there are things, and here's a great thing with bringing a task force together, is we all come with our own perspectives and information. And if somebody hasn't seen it or isn't aware of it, that also, for individuals who are here and on this task force, it means that somewhere we're not finding it online or we're not finding those resources. And so if somebody has made that observation, it is something that, as with all of these elements, we will talk about. Some of them may simply be to preserve. Some of them is that we might transform. So that will, those concerns that you noted and have brought forward will be a part of those questions probably in that third meeting. So thank you for that. I did say we'll go to the next topic after Brian, but I did see, Karen, that you put your hand up. So we'll go to you, and then we will move on to our next topic.
Okay, thanks for addressing my question. My only concern is that less than half of the task force members completed the homework, and I'm one of the people who didn't, because I don't have real good, I don't have experience with the zoning regulations. I've never needed to petition for anything, so I did not have an example that I could use.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, is this set of conclusions really, I'm hoping what you said earlier is that this is not set in stone, because I feel like it's not a good, it's not a good sample of what this task force actually believes, because it's less than half.
Absolutely. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, Karen, and thank you for sharing the reason of why perhaps some folks might not have completed the homework. There will be continual homework assignments where it will be a little bit more defined. So this one leading into this meeting was a very broad topic to help bring that list together. As I mentioned, and definitely want to make sure everyone is aware, as we're going through discussions, as you're looking at other topics, the homework coming out of tonight as well will be to really look at our next set of questions. And we'll provide guidance of where those will look at and provide some thoughts on those. We will be able to update and add to this list if there are other additional elements. And if there are other conclusions, those conclusions really helped define this list. They are not conclusions of what we will completely be doing. Those conclusions, and I know, Greg, to address a little bit, those conclusions are what helped us define the list of elements to start evaluating and making sure we're very specifically touching on. So we'll add other elements, we'll look at other things as we go through. So we'll get to that next homework assignment and our next meeting. And as you said, we'll touch base on this list as we continue through. So thank you for bringing that forward. And I will take us to our next item, our case studies. So again, we did present these case studies at the last meeting. We touched on them very briefly, and it was more just to make everyone aware that there are other areas out there. And these are specific to our region. So while 3 of them, including ourselves, are in Maryland, one of them very nearby in Reston, Virginia, it's very specific to our region. And we wanted to come back to these and talk a little bit more. And these are the case studies we'll be using as we continue through talking through those questions and bringing the different elements of these case studies forward to identify what was done in those locations that might be relevant to the specific elements and questions that we're asking at this time. So before we get into some of those case studies, want to just, again, do a level set on zoning and the types of districts and zoning districts and a little bit more information on that, and also have this in your virtual binders in the future for this presentation, so you'll have access to this information. For some of you, I know this is probably very elementary, and for others who might not have had situations, this is some great information just to keep in mind. So there are multiple different types of zoning districts, and you can see this on the screen in front of you. This is Howard County's zoning map, which can also be found online. And you can look at what the different zoning districts are between the base zoning districts, and we'll talk about the base zoning districts, the floating districts, and the overlay zones. So those are zoning districts. And then there's different types of zoning approaches, and we'll speak to those as well. And then you can see the natural, agricultural, rural, suburban, and urban, and where they lay out. So talking specifically of Euclidean and base zoning. And this shows you, as we get into those different types of the natural through the urban, what types of zones exist within that. So the purpose and function of this Euclidean base zoning really is, as it says on the screen in front of you, it's mapped to property lines or geographic features. So it very much maps out onto that land that's in front of you. They're very separate land use types. They've got their own different requirements in it, with setback requirements, what it looks like, the massing requirements, how you build. And then the general categories that are within the Euclidean base zones, as you can see, is residential, mixed use, and non-residential. And residential having a number of different types, mixed use being exactly as it says, and then going into the non-residential, which is the office zones and manufacturing industrial zones. So that's the Euclidean base zoning. Then we talk about floating zones. So the purpose and function of a floating zone is that it's customized for that proposed development. And again, it only applies once the conditions are met for approval. It replaces base zone on the map where it is, but it is, you have your base zone, and then only if it meets certain requirements, this floating zone comes in and takes the place of the base zone. Examples, of course, Newtown as being one of them, community enhancement floating and office transition. So that becomes your Euclidean base and then your floating zone. And then we get to those overlay zones. So it's a very, very red graphic on your screen. And then that purpose and function is that it's overlaid on top of that base zoning district. So it can apply additional regulations. So you still have your base zoning and you put your overlay zone on top of that. And that allows for some of those additional regulations. And you can see some of the zoning examples here, getting into traditional neighborhood centers, light industrial, some of the others in here. So really wanting to provide some of that information on the zones. I know it's a very brief zoning class in that, but just making sure that everyone has that information and will be able to refer back to it in the future with this presentation. Now, of course, with zoning, because nothing is absolutely cut and dry, there are alternative zoning approaches that can be done. There is the performance-based zoning, which really comes down of the desired income of offering design flexibility to meet the goals. There's incentive-based zoning, which came through someone's homework assignment that talked about incentivizing zoning. And the incentives provide more amenities, grants, more incentives. For example, if you have more density, maybe there's parking reductions. As you have different elements, you can, as you're adding one thing in, you might be able to reduce something else. And then the form-based zoning, which really is building design and character are much more prescriptive. So with that, very quick base understanding, I want to go back and touch on our case studies. So Montgomery Village in Maryland, all of these case studies really came about in generally the same time frame. And the sizing is in here, so we can also see this. So this had that developer, that visionary, that single person with the Kettler brothers, late 1960s, early 1970s, was approximately 1,500 acres and has expanded to be over 2,400 acres. A couple of the things just from the zone characteristics, there was an overlay over the base zone. And so that's something that we talked about in what can be done with zoning. So this has become an overlay over the base zone. There is the PDP, which is the land use map. There's no FDP with this. and the overlay zone with Euclidean zoning underneath, and going through really a standard development approval process. However, once you get into the overlay zone, you need to have the specialized special criteria and site plan approval to make changes. So just something to note within Montgomery Village. As I mentioned, we will come back to each of these as we go into different specific questions. So then Reston, Virginia, again, the 60s, it was approximately 7,400 acres when it began. It has also expanded to 9,800 acres. One developer visionary who put this forward. The key focus is to have that more flexible planned community development. And when you look at those zone characteristics, this comes back to being that floating zone. So the floating zone being where you have the base zone, the floating zone comes in, falls on top, that's now the zone. So there is, the PDP does not include acres, does not track percentages, and there is no FDP. So density is only identified by the land use type within this. Guided by the master plan with the land use density regulation. So that master plan is what identifies those densities, and any kind of change does require a legislative approval process. And then Greenbelt, Maryland. With Greenbelt, Maryland, so this is something that really came through FDR, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, as part of that resettlement administration, to help identify, and rebuild and identify new communities. And there were a lot of this going on throughout the region. So it was 1952 incorporation, but notice in 2018, the conservation overlay zone was added and completed. So the current size is about 3,900 acres. It does preserve the village character open space, and those zone characteristics again comes back to that overlay, as I noted in 2018. So the overlay over the base zoning. So you can see in here, the PDP without acres or percent tracking, there's no FDP. It does follow the approved neighborhood study for land use and the density, and then it follows a standard development approval process, but with special criteria when it comes to that neighborhood conservation overlay with the Euclidean zoning underneath. So each of these case studies follows something a little bit different, but still comes back to whether it is that floating zone, the overlay zone, how exactly that functions within it. And what's also important to note is that each of them follow an approval process, and how they're tracking things slightly differently is all. And all of these are considered a new town zoning districts within each within their own right. So with that, we'll get into the actual PSET discussion. And the first question we're going to be talking about is creating another new town district. So currently, the existing section 125 has language in there about what it takes to create another new town zoning, a new town district. So the question as we go through this material and information that we will be asking at the end is, should we keep, remove, or modify the section of the zoning regulations that guide the creation of a new town district? And we'll move this over. So what you can see is that link that is in that PowerPoint. There is a lot of information in here, so we did not take everything. This is section 125 of the code, and there is a lot in here about no new town district shall be created except by the procedure set forth herein, so on and etc. I did not take all of this information and put it onto the next slide. I did want to put that link in here so you can see where we've been getting, where this information is easily accessible. But essentially what is included says that it must be a contiguous planned community for 20,000 or more people. that it must be a minimum of 2,500 acres, that a preliminary plan must be presented to the zoning board, and the zoning board will determine the petition complies with the provisions of the regulations. The Newtown district should be located at the proposed site. And the PDP, preliminary development plan, constitutes a general land use plan for the area and meets all of the objectives of the regulations. So with that, those are the requirements for another Newtown district as stated currently in section 125. Michael, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm not clear on how that applies to, or if it applies to expanding a Newtown district. Is there a such thing as expanding a district to add land to an existing district, or is that just for creating a new one whole cloth that's not attached to anything else?
I can jump in and answer that. It's a good question,
Absolutely.
Michael. So it does not apply to expanding an existing Newtown district. That would be more like an amendment to the preliminary development plan or the PDP, which has been done before. This is for creating an entirely new Newtown district mirroring Columbia. So that's where you have that like minimum requirement of 2,500 contiguous acres that a developer would need to own, and then propose a whole new set of like a new PDP and a new set of FDPs that would match, similar to what was done with Rouse and Newtown for Columbia. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
I see Greg and then Brian and then Sarah. I know this is the next grouping of information, so gets into this a little bit further. So I don't know if Sarah, if you would like to at this time take the two questions or walk through the information first and then come back to the questions.
Sure. How about we go ahead and walk through? I know we only have a couple slides before we get to the discussion portion, and then we can talk through some of the questions in the discussion. Quickly wanted to highlight, based on those requirements for a new Newtown district, as many of you know and are familiar with, our county's general plan, HOCO by Design, found that not much land is available for greenfield development in the county. So only 2% of the land in the county remains undeveloped or unprotected. And a lot of that land is covered by environmental features that can't be developed, like steep slopes or floodplains. So given the limited undeveloped land in the county, it's very unlikely that a developer would have access to the 2,500 contiguous acres to establish that new town, as per the requirements in section 125. Next slide. So based on that limited availability of undeveloped land, HOCO by Design's policies really focus on targeting future growth into redeveloped activity centers, which you can see in the areas in orange, those areas to transform on the map. And activity centers are much smaller and more targeted. So rather than something like a new town, which require a larger contiguous section of land. As an example, Gateway, our biggest activity center, is about 1,100 acres and owned by multiple property owners.
So before we do the question, I do want to call on the two part of it, as well as I'll just note that as I've moved to a new computer, I need to open the survey that will be shown here momentarily. So we'll go Greg and then Brian, and then we'll pull the survey up. Greg, did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. No, I was just curious to do this. Obviously, it can't be done within Columbia. And the purpose of the task force is to address zoning in Columbia. Wouldn't the question on this be more appropriate to a broader Howard County audience?
So that's a good question. The task force is focused on section 125. So it's the framework around Newtown zoning. So
Okay.
as part of Newtown zoning is that set of requirements to create another Newtown. And one thing that's been brought up by task force members is whether we need this section. So that was how this element came to be part of the discussion, if that helps.
Okay.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands.
Oh, I put my hand up.
Oh, sure, Brian.
Yeah. Well, you asked the question: should there be another new town district? I think you're right. We might want to tweak the new town zoning, but it's been very successful. I think. Why wouldn't we continue with the same model that seems to have created a wonderful town?
That's a great thought, and I think definitely helpful for our discussion coming up as Jennifer pulls up our quick polling question. So I can kind of talk through the setup for this a little bit while she's pulling it up. As we get into these PSET discussions, we'll have kind of a quick poll. It's certainly not a final vote on anything. It's just to get a sense of what people are feeling in the room, and that'll help us get through a discussion on how people are feeling, whether this is something we want to preserve, something we want to strengthen, or something we'd like to transform, and why certain people might feel on one side of the spectrum or the other, just to get people thinking as we get to develop these recommendations into the future.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
generated-
I'm just gonna go in. Thank you. Thank you also for asking those two questions. That gave me a moment to be able to log in on this computer that I'm able to participate on this meeting from. And we will come back to discussion. So Karen, I've noted that your hand is up as well, and we'll come back to that. But do want to do this quick poll. And this is a way that we'll be able to garner information from everyone. As Sarah noted, these polls are not definitive. We're not voting. It's just to get a feel for how everybody is thinking on these topics, and we'll be able to help guide us in our discussions as well. If you have used this before, there's two options. One, you can log in using the www.menti.com and adding in your use code. The other is that you can scan the QR code to the right. I do have it on another screen, so I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to view all of that. So I'm going to switch over which screens I am sharing here. And don't log out of it. We will come back and use this. There will be additional questions afterwards. And I'll stop sharing the one screen and start sharing the other so that you are able to see as people are also participating.
Well, where's the code?
It is coming back up again. Did you add in? Did you go in through www.menti.com? Brian, is that how you had gone to it?
Yeah, I got to the website, and then the code.
And then
now I can see
the code.
Okay,
Oh.
I've got it now.
Perfect.
Just don't take it away.
I'm not. We're going to stick on this slide here for a moment as everybody is entering. So again, this is, should we keep, remove, or modify the section of the zoning regulations that guide the creation of a new town district? And looking at the results of this question, very divided on what we're thinking with it. And I know both Greg and Brian, you have already stated a little bit with your discussion on it. So I'm going to go to Karen, and then I'll be asking, because you have your hand raised, and I'll just be asking some folks who've responded on the different ways. Now, I can't see who the responses are coming from, so I will just go through, Karen, after you ask your question, and basically ask, for someone who responded to remove the section to share your rationale of why you did that, likewise for someone to modify the section. So we'll begin first with you, Karen.
Yeah, I'm confused as to why. So it sounded to me like we can't create another new town district. And it feels like this is just an administrative exercise in cleaning up the codes. But I would like to know, if we remove it, what happens? Like, what does that allow then? Is there no more new town zoning except for what exists where we built Columbia? Yeah, I want to know what the repercussions are if I take it out, because that's what I don't understand.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I'm kind of looking to Sarah as well, because I can certainly speak to some of the answers. But I know you are entrenched in this on a regular basis. So let me know which way you'd like to go, Sarah, Jeff, which way you'd like to go with the responses. If that's something you'd like to take the first stab at, would like me to.
Sure, happy to answer that question a little bit. This is definitely more of an administrative cleanup effort. I think that some task force members have brought up that this could really help the section 125 be a little bit more efficient in the text. So that's part of the reason this got brought up. Really, this wouldn't apply to changes to Columbia at all. This would just be removing the ability to create like a 2,500 acre new town somewhere else in the county. If anyone
So,
from DPV
so
has anything to
Karen,
add.
to your specific question on that, would it remove the ability to create another new town? Yes, that would, because there wouldn't be that creation in there any longer.
So then what would you just have unfettered development? Like how would that, so someone has a huge piece of land, maybe it's not, I mean, since it sounds like it's not possible, but I know we have farmland out there. Can the farmers then, if you're zoned for agriculture, what happens then? There's no new town zoning guidelines. I'm just
Yeah,
curious as to what that would mean.
that's a great question. No, it doesn't exclude that we have other zones other than Newtown around the county. So we certainly have ways that land use and densities and open space are regulated in other ways. So as Jennifer mentioned, that Euclidean zoning, and even we have other floating zoning districts. And as we look to activity centers like Gateway, we might be looking at exploring other alternative zoning types like the incentive zoning, which was mentioned. Currently out west, densities do not allow for anything like a new town to be established. So if someone owned a large portion of land, they would certainly be limited in that density capacity as zoning stands today. So they would be guided more by the existing zoning on the site.
Does Gateway qualify as a new town, since I don't think it had the acreage qualification?
Sure. Gateway is largely zoned M1, but definitely check out our Gateway Master Plan page. We have quite a bit of presentations and material about that in our draft plan. But it's got a few other of our Euclidean zones, and the master plan talks about some of the exploration for zoning tools that could be used in the future.
And so just reiterating on that, the new town zoning is one specific. So again, as Sarah had mentioned, new town zoning is one very specific type that establishes that parameters is within it. Zoning exists as a whole, and developers, outside of this particular district, that is how the land is already set up for development based on what is the zoning, if it is that large piece of agricultural land, Karen, as you noted, that's got a land use type, that's got a zoning type. If a developer were to come in, they'd have to go, because of what land use type and zoning type it is, they'd have to go through the process to request any change be made because it's an agricultural land. And so there's still that set over it and that guidance that has to be followed, because it would be a zoning change. So I do see quite a few hands up, and I am going to go to those who have not had a chance to speak first during this meeting. So I'll go first to Joan, and then Fran, and then I see Renee, and then I'll come back to Brian and George, because I know you've had opportunities to speak already as well. Joan.
I just want to be clear. What we are talking about right now is simply the section, I don't have it in front of me, the section of 125 that specifically deals with creating the zone. That's the only thing that we're talking about removing, since the opportunity to create a zone of at least 20,000 acres does not exist, or 2,500 acres does not exist in the county. The rest of the zoning regulation that deals with other aspects of Newtown, with CSP or or SDPs or FDPs or whatever. We haven't talked about those yet. We're
Correct.
just talking about the little piece that says you got to have a whole bunch of acres before you could even talk about this. And that's, since we don't have that anymore, it's unnecessary to have that. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that is the only piece. And that's a very important thing that you noted of the 2,500 acres that's basically not already in use, zoned, or in another capacity taken care of. So that is correct what you were saying. Thank you thank you for asking that question to provide that clarification as well. So the next was Fran.
I was going to reiterate what Joan just said, that we're just talking about that one section. Part of our charge is to look at section 125. I assume we'll look at 128 as well, which are the additional bulk regulations at some point. And we're trying to make the code is very, very long. And when you get to downtown, it even gets longer and it's somewhat confusing. And so if we can make it a little less, a little shorter, I think it's a good idea. Sorry.
Thank you, Fran. Appreciate it. And the thing to note with this, and I'm glad you brought that up, of our charge is, so our charge is section 125 to really look at everything. Some things may change. Some things may change exactly as they are, but it's our due diligence through this process to look at everything that's in there. The questions that we're starting with are the ones that came as a result of input, of stakeholder input, everything I mentioned before. So that's where we're starting with some of those, and they're some of those topics as a whole, but we will be looking through all of this to just make sure, is it still relevant? Is it not relevant? Does it need to be strengthened? Does it need to be transformed? So next is Renee, and then I'll go to George and then Brian. I'm sorry, Greg. I don't know why I keep wanting to call you George. Sorry, Greg.
I answered anything.
I think I said that to you earlier and you answered to it as well. So sorry, go ahead, Renee.
So if we're removing the portion of the regulations that guide the creation of a new town district, does that mean that Columbia is no longer a new town district? I know, I'm asking questions. I'm confused.
Yeah, happy to answer them. Shaking my head because the answer is no. It does. Columbia still remains a new town district, even if you remove the section on the creation of a new town district.
Then why are we discussing that if it doesn't really pertain to Columbia?
It does pertain to section 125, which is the new town zoning. So it's the framework of new towns. So that was part of the charge of the task force, and it was brought up as a way to make section 125 more efficient.
Okay, I don't understand. So I'll wait and have a private conversation with you.
We'll go Greg, then Brian, and then Michael. Greg, you're on mute now if you're speaking.
Okay, good. You got me now?
Perfect. Yes.
I find this fascinating and an interesting discussion. It brings back memories of conversations with people who were, occupied key positions in the Rouse Company many, many years ago. At the time that Newtown zoning was done, this is what I've been told, there was anticipation, it was set up in anticipation of there being more than one Newtown, that the county commissioners' general preference would have been on the success of Columbia to go further west towards Dayton, Mount Airy, and do another Newtown. Just the fact that we're bringing it up brings back that bit of history and conversations I had over the years. Give you a little bit of a flavor as to why, it may be there as it exists in the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for sharing that history. And that's absolutely correct. The component to think about, and Renee, this may help as well, is this section 125, this comes about because it was at the creation of Columbia and the Newtown, Newtown district, Newtown zoning, all of that together. So this is dated, and that's why we're looking at it. Is there still that land available? Not really, to do another Newtown. So it's not specific to Columbia in that aspect of, to that question, as we're going to talk about with some of the review processes, which really get specific to what exists. But it is specific to section 125, and it's right up front. When you go to section 125, it's right up front in there. So the ability to potentially remove it shortens it, cleans it up some. To not remove it, it just leaves it in there should things change in the future. We'll go next to Brian, then to Michael, and then to Matt.
So just one question. Has someone come to you asking to do a new town, suggesting a different size? So 100 acres, or 1,000 acres? Or is this in response to some sort of demand to build smaller new towns?
That's a great question. That's not something that's happened to my knowledge, but we're happy to go back and check with our developer land review team and see if that's something that's come up previously and let the task force know.
Well, because the examples you gave of Reston and Greenbelt, they're all different sizes, and throughout the world are different size new towns. Mm-hmm. If there's a more applicable size, well, it could be 500 acres, but it seems to me we should keep that concept in the new town zoning to allow for new towns or new villages. I suppose it would be small towns.
Thank you, Brian.
So just what I say is look at what developers would want, what would be practical, Okay.
Great, thank you. And noted, this is not what we have this on the screen, and clearly there's not a consensus at this time or a point of concurrence. So this is very good to get these questions and ask this information so that as we come to the recommendations portion of this process, we can circle back with some of this further information to be able to solidify a recommendation. So I will go to Michael and then Matt, and then we will move on to the next topic of conversation for the evening. And just a quick note before I go to you, Michael, Greg, and Brian, you both still have your hands raised. So I don't know if you just haven't lowered them yet. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, to Brian's point, Columbia turned out well. And so that if we can expand Newtown to it seems to have worked out better than a lot of the Euclidean zoning around here. So if it can be expanded, I think that'd be great. And if modifying that section of the code to make it easier to expand is possible, I think that would be good because of the success Columbia's had. Of course, I'm very skeptical that there's just enough land left in the county for that to really be practical. But I kind of leave it up to, I would kind of defer to y'all at DPZ that know how to write regulations about this to know that, hey, there is a practical way to make it easier to add a new town district in without land or not. Over.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And Matt.
I would just kind of echo what the last couple speakers have said, that it wouldn't really be right for us as a Columbia-based group to kind of limit the creation of new town districts outside of Columbia in this way. So I definitely wouldn't want to remove the section. Speaking as a developer within Columbia Gateway, which is, really one of the only 1,100 square foot, 1,000 square foot or 1,000 acre plus areas within the county that could theoretically be quickly, assembled into a new town if we lowered that threshold. it probably wouldn't work anyways, just given how much easier it would probably be to create an overlay district or floating district or form-based district instead. So, I mean, I don't see the harm in lowering the threshold, since it probably wouldn't be used anyways. But whether you do it or don't, I guess I'm trying to say, it doesn't really, wouldn't make a difference to any of the existing kind of developments right now, but who knows 20, 30 years down the line what West Howard County is going to look like. So I wouldn't want to limit their development too much.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you everyone for your input, your clarifications, your questions, and your thoughts on this. Some of the key takeaways that I have down, and we'll definitely go through all of the notes as we continue on, is as we move this from our discussion, the PSET discussion, and move to the recommendations in our future meetings, to bring back information such as how much land is left in the county that would have this potential, and perhaps what it should be is lowering the threshold. And so we will take a look at those so that as we come back to discuss this again, since there's not a clear consensus or concurrence, we'll certainly come back to this topic, and we'll have some of that further information to discuss at that time. But it will be not till at the earliest our December meeting. So again, just how it's rolling through is we're going to look at these major elements. We're going to come to these discussion points. We'll either come to some concurrence with it, look at further recommendations, or identify what else is needed to help this task force have the information that they need to be able to move forward with recommendations. So at this time, do not close out of your Menti surveys yet. We will be coming back to that. But first we're going to present. So let me switch over the screens here and present to the next major topic for this evening. And that is the discussion regarding credited open space. And the two questions we're really going to tackle tonight as we talk about this. So one is just will be a yes or no. And again, same format. We'll present these questions, we'll present information, then we'll come back to the questions. And using that same survey polling link, we'll use that to help us guide some of our discussion. So the questions are, does the definition of credited open space in the Newtown zoning code reflect its current uses? And then the other that we'll really start diving into is, should we preserve, strengthen, enhance, or transform the definition of credited open space in Newtown zoning? So they look very similar questions. The first is just really, hey, what is our gut feel? Are we capturing it already? Or do we need to do something with it? So if you're saying, yes, we're capturing it already, that means you're really thinking we need to preserve it as it is. If you're saying, no, it probably doesn't. So then we need to look at, do we strengthen it, that language? Do we enhance that language? Or do we change it? Do we transform it to better accommodate not just what exists today, but this is that forward thinking process of, what was started 40 years ago, 50 years ago, has worked very well to get us to where we are today. But what do we need to continue to move us into the future? So with that, I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Excuse me, can you put a link back up, because I lost my link to your survey?
I will. When we get back to it, I'll put that back. It'll come back up with that slide.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So currently the definition of open space in Newtown zoning is, as Jennifer has highlighted here, those uses which do not involve any extensive coverage of the land with structures. And cites examples such as agricultural uses, playing fields, golf courses, streams or lakes, or public and community uses. It also notes that open space uses shall not include parking lots, streets, rights of way, amusement parks, golf driving ranges that are not ancillary to a golf course, or drive-in movies, to be specific. So to our next slide. Oh, you're right on time. So open spaces, as you saw in the last slide, we have that minimum requirement, as many of you know, of 36% open space across the entire Newtown district. And that's all tracked in our FDPs. So you can see here we have an FDP where you have 2 lots that are apartments, or in this case, they're attached single family homes for the majority of the lot. And you'll see in the south, where I have it zoomed in a little bit, these 2 sort of strips of credited open space. And you'll see they each have their own acreage of about like 1.05 and 0.742 acreage. So the FDP tracks these as credited open space, and DPZ receives them and continues tracking all of these acreages to make sure they line up with that 36%. So on the next slide, we've got another view of that. So this is just an aerial to make it a little bit clearer. So you can see the 2 lots here, and then in that orange tan color, you can see each of those is a wooded area that counts as credited open space for the FDP. And those meet up for our 36% open space requirement. So across the entire Newtown district, there are about 5,200 acres of land dedicated to parkland and open space, which often includes environmental features. And you can see in the pie chart to the right, the largest categories of open space are made up of wooded areas like we just saw, recreational open space, or pathways and trails. There are also some smaller segments like swimming pools, school sports fields, or recreational buildings. And then looking at other master plan communities, there are a few key differences in the definitions of open space. So only Montgomery County or Montgomery Village has a similar open space requirement in the zoning code, but for only 10% of the land area of the district, while Reston and Greenbelt do not have any minimum requirements. Looking at the other, how other master plan communities define open space, several of our case study communities have standardized definition of open space across all zoning districts. So that means they might have one open space definition that could apply to a residential zone, that's single family, or an office zone, or mixed use district zone as a base zoning district. And then the zoning tools are used to manage and protect open space, and those differ by each community. So in Montgomery Village, the overlay zone protects the existing open space to maintain that 10% minimum requirement. So you might have a base or Euclidean zone that's residential, and the overlay zone protects the existing open space that's within that residential zone. In Greenbelt, open space areas were rezoned to Euclidean base zones, agriculture, and preservation. So instead of having like open space as part of a residential zone, they're all part of that agriculture and preservation base zoning district. And then in Reston, it's a little bit more similar to Columbia, where all open space falls under the floating planned residential community zone. So that has requirements for maintenance falling to the public entity that owns the land for public parks, or for privately owned open space, maintenance responsibility often falls to the associated HOA. That could be like Reston Association or a specific neighborhood HOA.
So that was a lot of information at once, and a lot of great information. So we come back to those 2 questions. Does the definition of credited open space in the Newtown zoning code reflect its current uses? And then should we preserve, strengthen, enhance, or transform the definition? So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment because I do believe on, oh, there's my next question over here. Actually, I'll leave this one up here so you can still, because the QR code does not come under the second question in here. So again, you can either join with the www.menti.com and the use code that's listed, or scan with your phone. And the next question will be available that says, does the current definition of credited open space reflect its current uses? I'm going to switch the slides over, so hopefully everybody has at least grabbed those QR codes. So I'm going to stop the one video and, oh, not my video. I will stop the sharing and then I will share over so everyone can see as the answers are occurring. We'll wait another moment for individuals to add in. While the QR code is not shown here, if you have not rejoined, you can see at the top of the screen, you can do it with the website and the use code. All right, it looks like we have quite a few responses, 10 saying yes, 3 saying no, and 1 saying I'm not sure. So for the individual who has said, I'm not sure, I'd love to hear what information or comfort level you would like to get to just help better answer that question.
Yeah, so that was me, and I just don't understand. The question doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if the current uses weren't meeting this definition, it seems like there would be a zoning violation. So it seems like an axiom that it must meet the current uses, but I'm sure you wouldn't be asking a dumb question, so that makes me think I'm missing something.
Okay. I appreciate the feedback on that. And the question is a little bit of trying to help get people into the mindset for this. So appreciate that. For those who said, there's 3 individuals who said that it did not meet, that our current uses don't meet the open space. I'd love to get some feedback. And I see Joan has her hand up. You are on mute, Joan.
So the reason that I said no is because I want to make sure that I understand uses that I believe are uncredited open space, which may actually not be uncredited open space, which would be like swimming pools and Columbia Association, other facilities that they have, golf courses and skate parks and things like that. Are those credited or uncredited? And similarly, what about school system properties? Are schools credited or non-credited open space?
So that's a great question, Joan. And happy to refer back to the pie chart slide, or if you take a look later and go back to it another time. So while I would say not all swimming pools or not all school sports facility buildings are credited open space, there are cases where that is the case. Similar with golf courses, there are golf courses that are counted towards credited open space, as well as swimming pools and school buildings that are recreational in use.
So I would assume, like if CA owns an office building, that wouldn't be on open space. That would be in whatever zone it's in or something like that. But what you've just said to me is that some of the things I listed can be or may not be. And if that's the case, do we need to strengthen the definition to more clearly indicate what are and aren't, and when they could be and not or not be open space?
Correct. And I think that's a great thought of, how do you distinguish, particularly as we've gone over the decades, and FDPs might have, identified open space thinking a little differently in the 1970s versus in the 1990s versus more recently. So I think adding clarity to that could be something that'd be really helpful.
That's why I voted no.
All right, well, we'll go to Karen and then Nina, and then the next question really talks about the preserve, strengthen, enhance, or transform. So you'll be able to vote essentially a second time. But But this was, again, trying to get everyone into that thought process, as well as make sure everybody had the information to be able to move forward into that second question. So Karen?
Yeah, this is a question of curiosity. I know in Columbia, we have the 36% that we're supposed to maintain. But do the schools fall under that 36%, or are they not part of the 36%?
So the school buildings themselves, I don't believe fall within credited open space, but school recreational sites that might be publicly available, there are cases on an FDP where those might include credited open space as part of that, like school campus.
Right, like they have the playing fields. What I wanted to know was like here in Thunder Hill. If I'm talking, do the playing fields at Thunder Hill Elementary School, do they count towards the 36% open space for Newtown zoning for Columbia?
I'm not sure about Thunder Hill specifically. Happy to double check on that.
It's not. I'm just using that as an example. I'm asking in general, do the school playing fields count as part of the 36%?
There are cases where school playing fields might count towards that 36%. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Nina, and then we'll move on to the next question.
So I was just going to say, I also voted no. I understand Michael's point about the question, but I think that there is confusion in the community as a whole about whether credited open space is recreational space. And I think this was Joan's point as to swimming pools and Karen's point as to playing fields versus whether it is natural space, and whether it has a primarily environmental and potentially stormwater function versus a recreational function. And obviously there are pieces, and I know like parking, for example, is never credited open space, but you know, how do you use any of the great facilities like pools without parking? So there's a lot of, you know, questions in terms of what should it be. I also think that there is, from my understanding, inconsistency in various FTPs about what is counted as credited versus not credited open space. So it'd be great to have clarity as the code evolves.
Great. So we will move to the next question, which I think will very much capture these responses. But I do also want to note and thank you, Michael, for adding in on the chat, which I just had open here and I have since lost it. But Michael did put into the chat of exactly where you can find the credited open space within the code, so that if you do need to go back to it and refer, as I mentioned before, we're gathering these responses now to identify and what's needed, and with the recommendations will come back as well. So the next question, which also should then be showing up in your menti.com, that you should be able to have there as long as you stayed in. And if you did not, you can rejoin at menti.com with the use code. Very much is what we've talked about in here of should we preserve, strengthen, enhance, or transform the definition of credited open space in Newtown zoning. And keeping in mind, preserve means really, you know, we're going to keep as is. Strengthen is to some of these elements that have been discussed of, do we need to add a little bit more definition to what is? Do we need to enhance it? Or do we need to change it altogether? And I'll wait another moment. We still have a few more to reply. All right. So in sharing the screen, we definitely see strengthening as really a major one. So 9 bringing in strengthening, 3 on the preserve, 0 on enhance, and 2 on transform. So very similar to last time. Let's go to the one that said that has the fewest on the transform. And for those who did state to transform it, so looking to really change, what is it that had you select transform. And go ahead and raise your hand if you had selected transform. Nina.
So if anybody else would like to go or the other person would like to go, I don't necessarily need to be heard, but for me, it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent in various parts of Columbia. I also think that, there are too many community conversations where people have incredibly different versions of open space. And I think that if we are reviewing Newtown zoning for the future, that there is an opportunity to address both the environmental concern and the recreational concern, and to make sure both are in the code and required. So it's not just one or the other, or how do we shoehorn this in?
Great. Thank you, Nina. Strengthened for somebody who, oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just gonna I was just gonna say that I chose strengthen, but I think my logic is exactly the same as Nina's. That I think we want to clarify what is credited and uncredited open space, and one way of doing that might be adding an additional category where, hey, these things that you don't really think of as natural spaces, right, like the forests and the fields, but are credited open space right now, like a ball court or something, or a ball field, right? Just adding a separate category for that to help people understand. I think that would be strengthening in my mind. And if Nina thinks that's transform, then doesn't matter. We agree on the concept, I think.
Right. And that's also, thank you, Michael. That's also why we ask these questions, because we might all view things slightly differently too, even in the word choice as we have the definitions. And that is a great point of green space, recreational space, open space. I like, Nina, how you said within the community, these phrases might be used interchangeably. But they might not be, and people might have that different feeling of what they are. And just from a timing perspective, for any of the three who selected preserve, would you like to share the rationale of why you selected preserve? Great. And actually I'll go to Ryan and then Karen.
So to me, it seems like everybody, when you talk to a lot of people about what makes Columbia great, they talk about the greenery and the open space. So it feels to me like if these are the regulations that produce that outcome, that everybody enjoys the way that it currently is, I don't know why we necessarily need to clarify. Like, I'm not against clarifying or listing more reasons in here, but it seems like the way that the regulations are currently written have produced good outcomes in most of the discussions that I have with people. So I don't know why we would need to modify that. But
Thank you, Ryan. And then Karen.
Yeah, honestly, Ryan said it very, very well. As someone who used to coach soccer and had a very difficult time finding open space, I didn't even need that much space for the kids to practice. It was incredibly challenging. So I'm one of those people who thinks we probably don't have enough open space. And so I think what we've got is good. And it's like Ryan said, it's been working. So why change it? Don't change what's not broken.
Great. All right, thank you. So again, as noted, we will come back to these during the recommendations to then identify as to those notes. It's not broken, but perhaps still, and Ryan, as you noted, and your hand is still up, so I don't know if you have another question or you just haven't lowered it yet. Perfect. But as Ryan noted, maybe it does require a clarification. The things, and we'll come back and discuss that during the recommendations. The major things we'll really focus in on, and as we're looking at all of this, as I said, we want to look at everything. It might come that we are preserving it as it is. on all of these different elements. It might come that we just need to add some clarifying language, but as we are looking at it, always keeping in the back of our minds that this was developed at the snapshot in time when it was, that it has worked to get us to where we are today, but we want to make sure it will continue to work. And as the world is vastly different, and even Greg, you'd mentioned earlier the county commissioners. Well, there's now a county executive, so that even Howard County has changed. So as all of that has changed moving forward, and looking into all of our crystal ball for the next 50 years, is what is in there still relevant, and do we need to strengthen the language for the next 50 years to those, or enhance, transform, all of those. So we'll continue to come back to that. So with that, we want to come back and always remember that these items, and we touched on this in the very beginning, the vision that through our visioning meetings we had developed with the people and community, diversity, inclusivity, open space and green space, aid in maintaining the spirit of Columbia, embracing the future while honoring the values we were built on, and being a place that needs to value its uniqueness based on its history, that we're always coming back to those. And we'll have this slide in future presentations. We'll really come back to it in the recommendations portion, but this needs to be also in that back of our minds as we're looking at all of the different elements. There, of course, is going to be another homework assignment. And so, Karen, you had asked that question earlier. Want to come back to this. So provide your response no later than October 14th. October is shockingly tomorrow. So keep in mind with that, October 14th is not too far away. But consider the topics for discussion for next month's next month's meeting, and provide your feedback regarding whether these should be preserved, strengthened, enhanced, and or transformed, and what that recommendation might be. So this will help really guide in a little bit further. So those conversations, the questions for next month are: should the role of the original petitioner change? Should the MIHU requirements apply to Newtown zoning? Should we amend the density cap of 2.5 dwelling units per acre across the entire district? This slide, as well as, and of course be prepared because that will be our meeting the next time. This slide, this information, as well as the information on this next slide, will be emailed out to you as we have done. I believe Jeff has sent the emails with the homework assignment. So you will also have this. What this next slide to aid, as Michael, you noted, if you're looking for something, here's where that is. This is what this also provides. So there is information already in the virtual binder materials, as well as calling out where the zoning sources are, so that you are easily able to find the areas specific to these three questions to review them. And again, to think about, does it need to be preserved? Do we need to keep it as it is? Do we need to change the language because it needs to be a little bit more nuanced or be more inclusive of something else? And of course, do we just need to change it completely? And changing it completely might be we get rid of it, or it looks completely different from what it is today. Always coming back to our job is to look over section 125, review everything, and just make sure that we have kind of dusted all those cobwebs off from when it was started, and we're making sure that it's either good to go for the future or change to continue to maintain the strength Columbia has today and enhance it for the future as well. So these two slides, again, will be sent out. The information within them will be sent out to you, so you don't need to write it all down in the moment, but I want to let you know what you will be receiving. So for wrapping up, going back through, we do have the anticipated milestones. We are in the middle of the PSET discussions now. We'll have 2 more meetings dedicated to this and looking at some of those major topics. The meeting in December will most likely be a combination of any remaining or additional PSET questions that may come up, as well as starting to get into the recommendations. And you'll note that in October, there is a public meeting and the public survey. I'll touch on that again here in a moment. For pending topics, just as we've talked about at previous meetings, I know it sounds a little bit of a broken record at the moment. We'll continue the PSET discussions for 2 more meetings. And at our next meeting, which will be in person, the next meeting of the task force will be in person. We'll also have a massing exercise, which will help us with some of these questions and really digging into what do some of these things look like if we're starting to look at changes to just help. Again, we're all different types of learners. We all absorb information differently, so it'll just help and really show some great examples for how things could change or how they could stay the same. Mentioned the upcoming task force meeting. So October 28th is 6 to 8 p.m. That will be in person, and we will send that location out with the meeting invitation as well. November, it is earlier than the 4th Tuesday, because unless we all wanted to have a potluck and bring some Thanksgiving dinner together, that is Thanksgiving week. So we will have a quick turnaround between these 2 meetings. It will be on November 18th, and that one in November will be virtual. And we will also have those save the dates on your calendars be going out. And now for our upcoming public meeting. We will have a public meeting. We've talked previously about the survey. So the survey is ready to go live, and there will be information out for that. Our public meeting, we are offering 2 options: an in-person option on October 20th, which is a Monday from 6 to 8 p.m. And then a virtual option the next day on Tuesday from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. The idea of doing this is to ensure that people who may not be available on Monday or may not be available to attend in person have the option to attend virtually. Likewise, trying to make sure we can accommodate everybody's schedules, different work shifts, childcare needs, etc. So that's why there's these 2 options. I see your hand up, Jen. I'll come right back to you in a moment. And with these, the premise of what is going to be put out there is really just an understanding for the community what this task force is about, what the efforts are, and asking some of those questions that have already been asked of you. So one, just sharing the information and that vision through the visioning exercise, asking questions about the different elements of the section 125, and really putting out the survey. So there's an online survey that does go through and ask for preferences. And that information from that public survey will also come back to this task force to help inform this task force looking at additional elements, which is why I said I'm fairly certain we'll still have some element and PSET discussion into December. Because if you look at the dates of these, it's only 1 week to our October meeting, and then shortly after is our November meeting. There will be flyers that go out as well about both the public meeting and this online survey. We'd love to get as many people as possible to participate in the survey. And one of the things we talked about early on in this process is that each of you as task force members have your own connections as well. So we'll send out the flyers to each of you, as well as sending it through Howard County's distribution list. And we definitely want to ask you to help promote both the public meeting as well as the survey. It's one flyer that talks about both, excuse me, excuse me, but also sending that information out as well. Joan.
2 questions. First question, maybe I missed it on the previous slide. The location of our in-person meeting, is that the 28th of October? Yes. What is the location of that in person?
Yes, that's posted to our website. I'm not sure if it's on the slide, but that is at the 50 Plus Center in the same meeting where we had our first meeting, the same meeting room.
The big room?
That classroom downstairs, if you remember.
Okay, 50 Plus, that is the east side 50 Plus Center. The other question I had, as you do the public meetings, will you have a sort of a little bit of a brief presentation so that people understand that we're not trying to get rid of Columbia, that we're just trying to update the regulations? Will you have any kind of a brief presentation about that prior to opening it to public question and answers?
So the intent is that for the in-person, there will be boards around the room so that individuals can walk around and view that. And then for the virtual, and it will be much of the same information that this team has already seen as well, through the 3 task force meetings to date, including tonight. And the virtual will go through those boards in a presentation format because it is virtual. And so having that ability.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll just add, we definitely will make it clear to the public that, you know, this is not an immediate rezoning or anything like that. These are recommendations that will be provided in a report for future consideration.
Thank you.
Great. With just a few moments left, I do want to open if there are any questions or discussion items that we can put on a future meeting agenda, or any comments at this time. All right, seeing no, oh, Michael?
I was just going to say that I thought tonight, especially compared to previous meetings, was really productive, and I appreciate the facilitation tonight. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. And I know tonight we are finally getting into actually being able to talk through the elements, which I know everybody came in ready to, as he said, ready to roll up their sleeves and dig right in. But definitely wanted to have some of that foundation leveling in the beginning and that visioning exercises. So thank you everybody for your participation in all aspects to date. Brian, you are on mute.
Yes, so we're going to be talking about the original petitioner. So that brings up the opportunity to talk about the roles of all the other entities as well, with like the Design Advisory Board, the Village Boards, the Columbia Association, just what their role, well, all the entities that are in Howard County that have something to do with Newtown zoning. We should be defining their roles as well at the same time. And because there's many people on this board, should be able to clarify that as part of the whole process.
We will look at that with all of the elements in our discussion.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no furthers, of course, as you do have questions or comments or suggestions, please email to Jeff and Sarah, especially as any thoughts come up. As soon as you hang up and have that brilliant idea of what's next, certainly email that off to Sarah and Jeff, and we will work to incorporate that. As you mentioned, those 3 questions with the homework assignment, those are the 3 we'll focus on at the next meeting. As we have additional elements, we'll look at where they might fit in as a major topic or add them on at the end to make sure that we are hitting the various elements of section 125 in the zoning code. So do want to thank everyone tonight for their participation, for the efforts that you have put forward so far. Quick reminder that our next task force meeting is October 28th. The public meeting, there is the October 20th in person and the October 21st virtually. You are not required to attend those as task force members, though we always highly encourage you to be as involved as possible. And so with that, unless there are any additional comments, and I'll turn it over to Sarah, Jeff, and Kristen, if you had any closing remarks for this evening.
No, with that, I'll try and give you all a couple minutes back if possible. I just want to thank you all for your participation and discussion. It's been really helpful this evening. Looking forward to seeing you all in person next month.
I second those sentiments, and I'll just also reiterate as people think about their homeworks. You know, always I encourage everybody to just open up section 125. You know, that is the ask of this task force. So if you can just familiarize yourself. You know, I know we put it into your workbook. Familiarize yourself with that, because that's where, you know, what this task force has been asked to really critique and look into. And so as much as you can do that, that would be helpful as in helping you to kind of think through some of the questions as you're doing the homework.
With that, and close out. Thank you all.
Thank you all.